The valley was meant to be deserted by sunrise. At least that's what the satellite feed had indicated. That's what the intel report had sworn. Twice. Yet the 6 Navy SEALs crouched behind a collapsing mud wall in Zandahar Valley weren't arguing about bad intel anymore. They were counting what was left of their ammo and tracking the tree line where flashes of gunfire were spreading like fireflies in the dark. Lieutenant Evan Rhodes pressed a hand to his throat mic and spoke the phrase no one ever wanted to hear on an open channel. "Broken arrow. Broken arrow. This is Sentinel 2-1. His voice stayed steady, even as dust rained from the wall. "We're combat ineffective, taking fire from 3 sides, requesting immediate close air support." Silence came back first, then static, then a disinterested voice from Koresh Command crackled through the radio. "Sentinel 2-1, nearest rotary asset is 40 mics out. Fixed wing is Winchester and RTB. Hold position for ground QRF. ETA 40 minutes. Rhodes glanced at Petty Officer First Class Mason Drake, whose leg bled steadily into the desert dust despite the tight tourniquet. Drake wasn't screaming anymore. He'd stopped 5 minutes back, and that silence was worse. The rest, Ramirez, Tanner, Nguyen, and Keller, had fallen quiet too. The kind of silence where everyone's mind turns into a calculator. Magazines left, rounds per mag, targets confirmed, targets unseen. The math didn't look good. The math didn't favor them. Then came a sound. Not the rotors they'd prayed for, not the rumble of approaching MRAPs, but something entirely different. A harsh, grinding growl like hell's own lawnmower tore through the air, rattling the ground beneath them. Lieutenant Rhodes lifted his head. Against the pale dawn sky, a single aircraft emerged from the north, flying dangerously low, skimming the ridgeline with reckless precision. Either a lunatic behind the stick or someone who knew exactly how far they could push a machine. It was an A-10 Thunderbolt II, the ugliest brute in the Air Force arsenal. An aircraft built around a cannon so obscene it could erase armor from existence. But it flew alone. No wingman, no support package. Just one warthog descending into a valley small enough to bury it whole. "Who the hell is that?" Ramirez muttered, peering through his rifle optic. Rhodes didn't reply. He watched as the A-10 banked sharply left, bearing its belly to the mountainside in a move so suicidal it bordered on art. The nose dipped, the cannon spun, and then the world detonated. The first burst lasted barely 2 seconds, sounding like a giant zipper tearing metal apart, 30mm shells ripping downrange at 65 per second. The tree line where the enemy had massed simply vanished. Trees shredded, rocks turned to dust. The second burst swept along the eastern ridge, erasing a machine gun nest that had been hammering their cover. The third was surgical, obliterating a hidden mortar team they hadn't even spotted. Rhodes stared, stunned, as the A-10 rolled inverted, dove toward the valley like it was trying to carve through the earth, then pulled up with such brutal force he swore he heard the metal scream. "Sentinel 2-1, this is Hawkeye 1-7. A calm, almost amused female voice crackled over comms. "I've got eyes on 6 friendlies and about 40 hostiles who just learned they picked the wrong valley. Sit tight, boys, I'm just getting started." For a long moment, no one moved. The SEALs traded silent glances, unsure if what they were seeing or hearing was real. Lieutenant Rhodes pressed his mic again. "Hawkeye 1-7, Sentinel 2-1. Confirm you're flying solo. Where's your wingman?" A beat of silence followed, then her voice came back, smooth and unbothered. "He's getting coffee. I didn't wait." There wasn't even a hint of sarcasm, just calm certainty. The A-10 rolled back into another run, banking wide, and Rhodes realized she wasn't maintaining a safe orbit. She was hunting, deliberate, aggressive, fearless. The kind of flying that earned either a medal or a court-martial, depending on who wrote the report. "Hawkeye, we've got wounded," Rhodes called out, forcing his tone steady. "One critical, urgent surgical." "I see him," she replied, the A-10's nose dipping again. "Also got 12 tangos in the wadi at your 6 they're flanking." A pause. Correction. They were flanking. The cannon thundered again. A violent mechanical growl tearing the silence apart. Rhodes watched as dust plumes burst along the dry riverbed. Enemy bodies flipping and scattering like rag dolls. The A-10 flew so low now he could see the pilot's helmet through the canopy, her head moving constantly, searching, tracking, protecting. She wasn't just firing and leaving, she was guarding them, circling like a vulture that had chosen to defend the dying instead of feeding on them. "Who the hell is she?" Drake rasped from the ground, voice weak but alive. Keller shook his head. "No clue, but if we live, first round's on me." Rhodes squinted through his binoculars, memorizing the tail number when the radio came alive again. "Sentinel, Hawkeye here. You've got more heat inbound from the northwest. 30 dismounts, 3 technicals with mounted guns. Looks like they're bringing friends." Rhodes' gut sank. 70 enemies, maybe more. 6 men, 1 down, ammo running thin, rescue still 35 minutes out. The odds had gone from bad to suicidal, but before he could respond, the A-10 pulled a move he'd never seen in his life. It climbed, nose straight up, air brakes flaring, bleeding speed until it seemed to hang frozen in the sky, like a hawk deciding where to strike next. Then the warthog rolled, plunged, and came screaming down at such a savage angle that Rhodes thought she'd bury it straight into the mountain. "Hawkeye, what the hell are you doing?" he barked. Her voice came back, steady, calm. "Trust me." From the A-10's wings, streaks burst outward, flares, not bombs, dozens of blazing orbs burning magnesium bright, trailing white smoke as they fanned across the valley. The air lit up like an ancient battlefield, drenched in ghostly fire. The enemy panicked, opening up in every direction, revealing every hidden nest they'd tried to mask. Hawkeye 1-7, still diving, still accelerating, unleashed the cannon again. This time there was no precision, just destruction. She swept her fire across all 3 technicals in a single, methodical pass, left to right, clean as brushstrokes. Each vehicle erupted in a chain of orange fireballs blooming across the dust. Fighters scattered, running blind, with nowhere left to hide. The A-10 pulled up, rolled left, twisted right, and dove again before the smoke had even cleared. She was relentless, tireless, fighting alone without a wingman, without AWACS, without guidance, just her eyes, her gun, and whatever storm burned inside her. Rhodes had spent 9 years in combat, called in Apaches, Vipers, Hornets, even B-1s dropping J-dams from 30,000 feet, but he'd never seen anything like this. This wasn't close air support, it was personal. "Hawkeye," he warned into the mic, voice rough, "you're danger close. I repeat, danger close, we're within 100 meters. "I know exactly where you are, Sentinel," she replied evenly. "Keep your heads down." The A-10 roared overhead so low, Ramirez swore. Later, he could have brushed its landing gear with his hand. The cannon barked again. A tight, controlled burst. Something exploded behind the wall they were using for cover. Rhodes turned just in time to see the blast tear through an RPG team barely 20 feet away, one he hadn't even spotted. Keller muttered under his breath, half in awe, half disbelief. How the hell did she see them? Hawkeye's voice returned, calm as ever, not a hint of strain. "You've got more movement on your east side. Looks like they're setting up a mortar." Copy, Rhodes replied. I'm on it. The A-10 rose again, slower this time, and that's when he noticed it. A thin gray ribbon trailing from the left engine. She'd taken hits, maybe more than one. Hawkeye, you're trailing smoke, he said. Are you hit? There was a pause, too long. Then her voice came back, steady but tighter. Nothing I can't handle. Worry about your own problems. But Rhodes heard it, the subtle shift, the grit of someone working through pain. He pressed the mic again. Hawkeye, if you need to RTB, I'm not leaving. 3 words, flat and final. She meant them. She wasn't going anywhere until they were safe, even if it meant riding that dying aircraft straight into the dirt. It should have reassured him, but instead it twisted something inside. He hadn't felt this kind of responsibility for anyone outside his team in years. The next 5 minutes dissolved into chaos. The enemy, realizing one lone aircraft was dismantling their entire offensive, tried to fall back. Hawkeye didn't let them. She boxed them in, drove them into choke points, burned every route of escape, cutting through them like a predator culling prey. The SEALs could only watch now, silent, stunned spectators to the storm above. Drake, pale but awake, managed to prop himself up, eyes on the sky. She flies like she's angry, he murmured. Nguyen, the medic, glanced over while rewrapping his bandage, or like she's got something to prove. Rhodes stayed quiet, eyes locked on the thickening smoke trail stretching behind the A-10. Finally, after what felt endless, though it had only been 8 minutes, the radio crackled with a different voice. Male, tense. Hawkeye 1-7, this is Hawkeye 1-6. What's your status? You broke formation, went dark. We've been trying to reach you for... I'm busy, Cross. Keep the coffee warm. Clara, the old man's gonna... Tell him I found some friends who needed help. I'll explain later. She cut the channel and switched back. Sentinel 2-1, Hawkeye. Your QRF's 10 mics out. I'm going to make sure they don't walk into a surprise party. You boys good for 10 more? Rhodes looked over his team. Drake, pale but holding on. The others bruised, drained, but alive. We'll make it, Hawkeye, he said quietly. Thanks. Don't thank me yet, Hawkeye replied, her tone laced with dry humor that cracked around the edges. I still have to land this thing. The joke sounded thin, forced, and Rhodes didn't miss the strain beneath it. The A-10 climbed higher, circling wider over the valley, its smoke trail painting a dark scar across the blue sky. His chest tightened. She was hurt worse than she'd let on. Still, she stayed. For 10 more minutes, that lone warthog prowled above them like a guardian angel armed with a 30mm cannon. Nothing moved without her noticing. Nothing threatened without being erased. When the MRAPs finally roared in, raising plumes of dust, the A-10 tipped its wings once, an old-school gesture out of a World War II reel, then banked north, limping toward Karash Airfield. Rhodes stood watching until it vanished behind the mountains. He didn't know her name or her face, but he knew the truth. She'd saved every one of them. Later, after the medevac, the debriefs, and the adrenaline drained from his veins, he did something he almost never did. He filed a commendation. Not a half-hearted formality, but a real one, detailed and fierce. He documented every pass, every impossible turn, every risk she'd taken. He wrote it like a man desperate to prove what he'd seen wasn't a fever dream born from fear and smoke. 3 weeks later, the reply came. Not from admin, but from an Air Force colonel at Koresh Command. The message was short. Your report has been forwarded. The pilot in question is Captain Clara Monroe, call sign Hawkeye. She's been flying A-10s in theater for 18 months. She's also been recommended for Article 15 proceedings twice for unauthorized solo actions. Your statement might help or not. She doesn't seem to care either way. Rhodes read it 3 times before looking her up. The search surprised him. She wasn't some reckless rookie with an ego and wings. She was 34, prior enlisted, 6 years as a combat controller before earning her commission and pilot slot. She'd been the one on the ground once, the one staring at the sky, hoping someone up there was listening. And suddenly, that day in the valley made perfect sense. She hadn't been showing off. She'd been answering a prayer she knew by heart. She hadn't been grandstanding. She'd been saving them the way she once wished someone had saved her. The Article 15 proceedings came soon after. Rhodes testified, along with Drake, Ramirez, Tanner, Nguyen, and Keller, and a dozen other ground units she'd rescued during her 18 months in theater. The charges were dismissed quietly, without press or ceremony, and Captain Clara Monroe went back to flying. But stories like hers never end where you expect them to. 6 months later, Rhodes was stateside again, training a new SEAL platoon in California when an Air Force public affairs officer called. They were producing a documentary about modern air support and wanted to interview him about the Zandahar Valley incident. He agreed, mostly hoping it would give Monroe the credit she never asked for. The interview stayed routine until the producer hit him with a question that caught him off guard. "What do you think made her take those risks?" Rhodes thought of that voice. Steady, fearless, utterly in control. He thought of the smoke trailing her aircraft, the way she'd refused to turn back, and her history, years on the ground before she ever touched the sky. Finally, he said, "I think she remembers what it feels like to be stuck, to call for help and wonder if anyone's coming. She flies, so no one else ever has to feel abandoned." The producer nodded. "We reached out to Captain Monroe for comment. She declined." Rhodes smiled faintly. Of course she did. People like Clara Monroe didn't fly for recognition. They did it because someone had to, and they were the ones with the nerve and the heart to do it. But the documentary still aired, and something unexpected happened. It went viral, not because of the explosions or combat footage, but because people connected to the idea of one lone A-10 pilot breaking orders to save 6 strangers. Comment sections overflowed with debates, admiration, disbelief. Some called her reckless. Others called her a hero. But veterans mostly called her something simpler. One of us. And through all of it, Clara Monroe stayed silent. She kept flying. Kept showing up when people needed her, then vanishing before medals could find her. Until one day she didn't return. It was supposed to be a routine mission, a convoy pinned down near Darash Province. Hawkeye 17 and her wingman, Hawkeye 16, responded. They cleared the kill zone, crushed the enemy positions, and turned for home, standard procedure. But somewhere between Darash and Korash, her A-10 suffered a catastrophic hydraulic failure, the kind that left her 60 seconds to decide, eject over the hostile terrain, or try to limp the dying jet back to friendly airspace. She chose the latter. For 12 brutal minutes, she fought the stick on emergency backup systems, muscle and will keeping the nose up. Beside her, Captain Ryan Cross stayed in formation, talking her through every second, offering to lead her toward a backup strip. But the Warthog was bleeding altitude, slowly, inevitably, fighting gravity 1 heartbeat at a time. Slowly, inevitably, the mountains were drawing nearer. "Clara, you need to eject," Cross urged, his voice tight with panic. "You're not going to make it." "Not over the villages," she answered, calm as ever. Her tone never wavered. "Too many people. I'll clear the ridge." She didn't make the ridge, but she did make it past the villages. Somehow, she kept that crippled warbird aloft just long enough to cross the last stretch of populated land. Only when nothing remained below but barren rock and scrub did she finally pull the handle. 3 seconds later, the A-10 slammed into the mountainside, breaking apart in a fireball bright enough to be seen from Karash Base. Clara Monroe lived, broken collarbone, shattered wrist, a concussion, but alive. The rescue crew found her perched on a boulder, still wearing her flight suit, looking more irritated than hurt. When they lifted her onto the stretcher, a pararescue man asked gently, "Ma'am, are you okay?" She gave him a look like he'd just asked if fire was hot. "I'm fine. Is my plane gone?" "Yes, ma'am, completely," she sighed. "Damn, I liked that one." That should have been the end. Medical leave, honorable discharge, quiet retirement. But 3 weeks into recovery, something no one expected surfaced. A video. Grainy, shaky, but unmistakable. Released by insurgents. It showed the twisted wreck of an A-10 burning high on a mountainside, and more than that, it showed the final moments before the crash. Captured from a fighter's phone, the footage followed a lone aircraft limping through the sky, trailing thick smoke, struggling to stay airborne. In the background, men's voices, taunting, laughing, waiting, certain the jet would crash in their territory, sure they'd capture or kill the American pilot inside. But the A-10 kept flying, kept dragging itself forward, kept clawing for distance one dying second at a time. When it finally went down, it crashed miles beyond their reach. The video ended with one insurgent spitting on the ground and muttering something in Pashto. Within hours, translations flooded the internet. The words were chillingly simple. She would not give us the satisfaction. What was meant to glorify their victory instead became a global testament to defiance. Within 48 hours, it had racked up 18 million views. Within a week, Clara Monroe's name was everywhere. News outlets ran it nonstop. Veterans groups shared it with pride. Even civilians who'd never heard of the A-10 understood what it meant. A wounded pilot in a dying jet, flying until the very end just to deny her enemies a trophy. And through it all, Monroe stayed silent. She recovered in a military hospital in Germany, rejecting interviews, skipping appearances, ignoring the tidal wave of messages and attention. The Air Force, sensing a PR windfall, tried to pull her into a medal ceremony. She politely told them to shove it. Exact phrasing unrecorded, but reportedly unforgettable. Instead, she filed for immediate reinstatement to flight status. Doctors said no. Flight surgeons said no. Command said no. So she fought back. She appealed. She argued. She aced every exam they set, physical, mental, emotional. She flew simulators until instructors admitted they had no more ways to test her. Finally, and reluctantly, they cleared her. 6 months after the crash, Captain Clara Monroe returned to Koresh Province. Same warthog, same mission, same call sign, as if nothing had happened. But something had. The troops on the ground knew her now. When Hawkeye 1-7 came over the radio, everyone listened. When she appeared overhead, relief followed. And when she left, the silence felt heavier. She wasn't just a pilot anymore, she was a symbol. Not the polished poster kind, but the kind that meant someone's watching your six when everything falls apart. Rhodes heard of her return through the veteran network and sent a short email. "Glad you're back. Stay safe." He hadn't expected a reply, but one came anyway, 3 words. "Define safe, Lieutenant." Rhodes couldn't help but grin. He forwarded it to his team and they all grinned too. But the brass at Koresh Command weren't smiling, because Clara Monroe, for all her brilliance, had a flaw. She couldn't stop taking risks. Or more accurately, She couldn't stop putting the mission and the lives below ahead of her own. She'd bent, twisted, and outright broken more regulations than anyone else in the squadron. She'd gone Winchester, empty on ammo, more times than any pilot in theater. She'd flown more danger close runs than protocol ever allowed and collected enough incident reports to fill a drawer. Her CO, Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Holt, finally called her in. Not for punishment, but for a talk, off the record, officer to officer. "Monroe," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you're the best pilot I've got. Maybe the best I've ever seen, but you're going to get yourself killed." She sat across from him, composed, hands folded neatly. "Respectfully, sir, that's not your decision." "It is," Holt said, "if you're flying one of my birds." "Then ground me." He stared at her. "You want me to ground you?" "No, sir, but if you think I'm a liability, that's your call. I won't fight it. I'll just transfer." "Transfer where?" he asked, exasperated. "No other unit would take you with your record." She smiled. Not kindly, but like someone who knew her worth. "There's always a place for a pilot who doesn't quit, sir." Holt sighed. He was a good officer, and he knew when the argument was lost. "I'm not grounding you, Monroe. But you're done flying solo, no more unauthorized sorties. You have a wingman for a reason. Use him." "Yes, sir." She left the office, and for a while she played by the book. She flew with her wingman, she stayed in formation, she followed procedures. But people like Clara Monroe treat rules as situational. And when someone's dying on the ground, and she's the only one close enough to help, rules become background noise. 3 months later, it happened again. A Marine forward base came under heavy attack. Casualties mounting, medevac pinned by enemy fire, desperate calls flooding the airwaves. Hawkeye 17 and Hawkeye 16 were nearby, refueling from a tanker when they heard the distress call. Cross wanted to wait for command clearance. Monroe didn't. She unplugged early, took just enough fuel for a round trip, maybe, and went. By the time Cross caught up, she'd already made 2 strafing runs and obliterated the mortar position hammering the medevac bird. He hadn't expected an answer, but one came anyway. 3 words. "Define safe, Lieutenant." Rhodes smiled and forwarded the reply to his team. They smiled back. The Air Force brass, however, weren't laughing. Clara Monroe, brilliant as she was, had a problem. She couldn't stop courting risk. More precisely, she kept putting missions and people on the ground ahead of her own survival. She'd bent and broken rules enough times to fill a file drawer, gone Winchester more than anyone else in theater, logged more danger close runs than any pilot around, and accumulated incident reports by the dozen. Her squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Holt, finally called her in. Not to punish, but to talk, officer to officer. "Monroe," he said, leaning back, "you're the best pilot I've got. Maybe the best I've ever seen, but you're going to get yourself killed." She sat, calm, hands folded. "Respectfully, sir, that isn't your call." "It is, if you're flying one of my birds, then ground me." Holt blinked. "You want me to ground you?" "No, sir. If you think I'm a liability, that's on you." "I won't argue. I'll request a transfer." "Transfer where?" he asked. "There's no unit that would take you with your record." She smiled, not kindly, but certain. "There's always someone who needs a pilot who won't quit, sir." Holt sighed. He was a smart officer and knew when he'd lost. "I'm not grounding you, Monroe, but stop flying solo. No more unauthorized missions. You have a wingman for a reason. Use him." "Yes, sir." For a time she obeyed, flew in formation, followed procedures. But people like Monroe treat rules as context sensitive. When someone's dying below and she's the only one who can help, Regulations turn into suggestions. 3 months later, a Marine FOB took heavy hits, casualties mounting, medevac pinned, Marines screaming for support. Hawkeye 17 and Hawkeye 16 were refueling nearby. Cross wanted clearance. Monroe didn't wait. She peeled off with just enough fuel to try, arrived, and by the time Cross caught up, she'd already silenced the mortar hammering the medevac. By the time Command noticed, the Marines were safe, and the bird was away. By the time Holt could chew her out, the Marine Company had sent a glowing commendation. Holt marched her in again, standing this time, arms crossed, jaw tight. "What part of follow orders is unclear?" he demanded. "The part where following orders means people die, sir," she answered. "You don't get to make that call." They stared until Holt admitted he had no clean choice: punish her and lose the best KS pilot in theater, or let rules bend and save lives. He waved her out of his office, left alone to wonder if he'd enabled a hero or a catastrophe. Meanwhile, across the theater, the word spread from dusty outposts to forward bases. Call for Hawkeye if you're in trouble. If she's nearby, she'll come. Maybe bending every rule, maybe terrifying you with how close she flies, but she'll come, and she won't leave until you're safe. That reputation became currency. It became legend. The moment that fixed Clara Monroe into modern lore came on a cold November morning near the Korash border. A Special Forces team, call sign Razor 32, was compromised on recon. Someone had talked. Within minutes, they were surrounded by more than 100 hostiles, pinned in a compound with no QRF in range, and a closing window before being overrun. Any station, this is Razor 32. Troops in contact, we're black on ammo, surrounded. Request immediate fire support. Grid follows. Bagram answered. Nothing available, everything committed or out of range. The AC-130 grounded, the nearest Apache 30 minutes away. Razor 32 had maybe 10. Then, through static, a familiar voice cut in. Razor 32, Hawkeye 17. I'm 12 minutes out. What's your situation? Came Monroe's voice. Steady through the static. The Special Forces leader, a grizzled captain named Grant Hale, didn't waste breath. Hawkeye, we're surrounded. Over 100 hostiles, fortified positions. They're preparing to breach. We need fire now, not in 12 minutes. Copy that, she replied. Mark your position with IR strobes and stay inside. I'm coming in hot. Hawkeye, you can't engage without... I can do whatever I have to. IR strobes now. Hale glanced at his men, down to pistols and grenades. The enemy, shouting outside, tightening the noose. He nodded. Copy, Hawkeye. Strobes are live. Northeast corner of the compound. Hostiles everywhere else. Visual confirmed, she said, 11 minutes out. 11 minutes felt like forever. The team could hear voices outside. Orders shouted in another language. The sounds of rifles being checked. Magazines slammed home. They braced, knowing the fight would reach them before the A-10 did, knowing they'd likely die waiting. Then came a sound. Distant, rising, not rotors, not the high whine of a jet, but something deeper, older, like thunder rolling through metal. And over it, something stranger, music. Wagner. Flight of the Valkyries, blaring from external speakers. Hale blinked. Is she playing Wagner? One of his men, Staff Sergeant Vega, started laughing. The kind of laugh that bursts out when death is inevitable and the universe hands you absurdity. She's insane, he gasped. She's an angel, another whispered. The A-10 broke over the ridgeline like something torn from myth. No circling, no orbit. It dove, nose down, air brakes open, plummeting like a stone with a jet engine's scream. The music thundered louder now, impossibly loud, shaking the air as Clara Monroe brought hell down on the valley. It was incongruous and terrifying, and somehow perfect. The enemy below, disoriented and panicking, opened fire in every direction. Hundreds of rifles and machine guns blazing at the descending aircraft. Clara Monroe didn't even flinch. At 500 feet, she leveled out, rolled inverted, and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8's roar split the mountains open. Her earlier strikes had been sharp, surgical. This was biblical. She held the trigger for 4 full seconds, far longer than any manual would ever allow, and 30-millimeter shells tore a smoking trench through the earth, erasing everything in their path. The compound shook as dust and debris blasted skyward. Enemy lines dissolved. She pulled up, rolled upright, and swung around again. This time, she didn't use the gun. She dropped 2 Mavericks, air-to-ground missiles screaming into the densest cluster of hostiles. Twin explosions erupted, orange fireballs rolling into black smoke, shockwaves rippling through the valley. "Razor, this is Hawkeye." Her voice came over the net, calm and cutting. "You've got a clear path south. Move now." Hale didn't hesitate. "Let's move. Go, go." The team grabbed their wounded and sprinted. The A-10 still overhead, making pass after punishing pass, crushing every threat that dared move. Monroe flew lower than any sane pilot ever would, so low that Hale could see the gleam of her canopy, the tilt of her helmet, the fierce focus in her posture even from the ground. They made it half a click before the extraction bird arrived. As the team loaded up, Hale turned for one last look. The compound burned, the enemy scattered, and the A-10 still circled above like a guardian refusing to rest. He keyed his mic. "Hawkeye, Razor 3-2, we're clear. Thank you, doesn't cover it." A pause, then her answer, soft but steady. "Just doing my job, Razor." "Stay safe out there," Monroe added, her voice soft but final. The A-10 banked east and vanished into the morning sun. Later, Captain Grant Hale would tell people he'd fought in 3 wars, flown under dozens of pilots, but never met anyone who flew like Clara Monroe. "She doesn't fly to survive," he said in an interview years later. "She flies like she's already dead, and her body just hasn't gotten the memo, like nothing can touch her because she's already given everything up. It's terrifying, it's beautiful, and it's the reason I'm alive." The brass, though, didn't see it that way. Unauthorized engagement, reckless flying, complete disregard for protocol. This time, they couldn't look the other way. Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Holt was ordered to ground her pending investigation. He fought the order, but the decision came from too high. 3 days after the Razor 3-2 rescue, Captain Clara Monroe was officially grounded. She didn't argue, didn't plead her case. She turned in her wings, cleared her locker, and vanished. 2 weeks passed. No calls, no messages, no word. Not from her squadron, not from her wingman Ryan Cross, not from anyone. It was as if she'd simply disappeared. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, the Secretary of Defense received a letter. Not an email, but a handwritten letter delivered through formal channels. It bore 347 signatures. Soldiers, Marines, SEALs, Special Forces, combat controllers, pararescue men, even a few from the Air Force. The letter was brief but powerful. It listed dates, coordinates, and outcomes, every instance where Captain Clara Monroe had saved lives, every rule she'd bent, every risk she'd taken. And at the end came a single paragraph. "We understand that discipline requires rules and regulations. But wars aren't won by rules, they're won by those willing to give everything for the people beside them." Captain Monroe is that person. Grounding her doesn't make us safer. It makes us more likely to die. Respectfully, we request her immediate reinstatement. If not, explain why regulations outweigh lives." The letter leaked within hours, likely on purpose. The press caught it, veterans groups shared it, politicians circled. The Air Force suddenly faced an impossible choice: court-martial a pilot beloved by every ground unit in the theater, or ignore the rule book and set a dangerous precedent. In the end, they chose a third option. They promoted her. Captain Clara Monroe became Major Clara Monroe. They handed her a Silver Star, officially for the Zandahar Valley engagement, though everyone knew it was for everything she'd ever done. The ceremony was small, no cameras, no press. A general she'd never met pinned the medal to her chest, said scripted words about valor and duty. She didn't respond, just saluted, turned, and walked away. Outside, Ryan Cross caught up with her. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She glanced at the medal, then back at him. "They're trying to control me by rewarding me," she said flatly. "It won't work." "Yeah," Cross smirked. "But hey, free medal." She almost smiled. Almost. "I didn't do it for medals, Ryan." "I know," he said softly. "That's exactly why you got one." They stood in silence. Two pilots who'd flown through hell, saying nothing because there was nothing left to say. Finally, Monroe looked up at the open sky, clear and endless. "I need to get back in the air." "You will," Cross said. "Just maybe follow a few more rules this time." She didn't answer. They both knew she wouldn't. Major Clara Monroe was reinstated 2 days later. Same squadron, same call sign. But something fundamental had changed. The troops on the ground no longer just respected her. They believed in her. Her name became a code for survival. Hawkeye's up meant you were safe. Hawkeye's Winchester meant you were on your own. Her presence became more than tactical. It was psychological. Soldiers fought harder when they knew she was overhead. They took risks they never would have dared before, convinced she'd pull them out alive. That faith was both a gift and a burden. Because Clara Monroe wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a legend in motion.